Hey there, you lucky libertarians. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Scottish Liberty Podcast, number 47, with me, Tom Laird, and
me, Antony Sammeroff.
Today on the show, we have a very special guest. We always have very special guests, but this one's very, very special. We have Chris Darren Deojee. How are you doing, Darren?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're great.
We're great. And I think as far as libertarian podcasts go, we have the most Scottish guests, even if they are abroad, because not long ago we had Colin Gunn, a Scottish liberty-minded fellow living in the States, and now you're staying down in England, aren't you, Chris?
I am, yeah. I'm in Suffolk. I'm very, very far away from the homeland, that's for sure. Nice to be able to connect back up, though, yeah.
Our commiserations. So, Darren, good to have you on. I think we're right in saying that we are the best podcast called the Scottish Libertarian Podcast anywhere in the world.
Scottish Liberty Podcast.
That too.
Both.
So today we're going to talk about something controversial.
Controversial?
Yeah. And that is, does patriarchy exists? So the first thing
patriarchy exists?
Yeah, does it exist? You know, does anybody care? So the first thing I've got to ask you, Darren, is, I mean, whenever I talk about this subject, even with feminists, and you ask them to define patriarchy, most of them can't really make a decent fist of telling you what patriarchy means. So, and there's a lot of people with very different definitions of what it means and what it is. Now, the one I know is the one I believe is from the Feminist Encyclopedia, which is patriarchy is a worldwide social and economic system that privileges men at the expense of women. Is that fairly close, or how would you define it?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to work with that definition.
I would like to hear how you define it.
Yeah, because before we argue about whether or not it exists,
let's make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Exactly.
Well, my understanding of it, I haven't read the Feminist Encyclopedia. I have encountered many feminists in this journey, though, both feminist men and feminist women. Right. And it's quite important to make that distinction when we're talking about feminists. It's not just women. We are talking about.
I find the second type even more annoying than the first, personally. But
I agree. I expect feminist women. I don't expect feminist men to be. You know, we can maybe talk about why a lot of men are feminists as we go along. But definition of feminism. Yeah. What?
The definition of patriarchy.
We hopefully have a bunch of feminists tuning in to check out
a bunch
this
is that
podcast and
a bunch of feminists
listen to our ideas. So
a bunch of feminists.
Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to lose some friends over this if you keep on going.
So that is treasure, though. That was treasure. That was like, is that what we're going to call a flock of feminists?
A bunch of feminists. Yeah.
I daren't laugh. I could get attacked in the street for laughing at that.
Yeah, attacked in your own house.
You could be.
Yeah.
So tell us, what was your working definition of patriarchy when you started writing or examining or being critical in this area?
Yeah, the idea that, just the idea that women are being oppressed by men as if by some kind of orchestration,
right?
As if by orchestration, as if men have sat down as a interest group and plotted and planned how to keep women
down, oppressed
in some way. I hate using
and
quotes, but I don't believe they've been oppressed. Yeah, even that. I mean, I think that's I'm not even sure. You know, let's obviously everybody's perception is different, isn't it? So people may have had the experience of oppression or suppression, but let's remember, I think for a lot of the women today, it's stories of historical suppression or oppression rather than personal experience, especially the younger women of today. And I think that's the issue to pick up on here is whether that actually exists or is even a thing or not.
Right, okay.
And the things that are influencing the toxicity of the feminist movement in its relationship with men. Because one thing is for sure, as far as I'm aware, men have not sat down as an interest group and plotted and planned over centuries to achieve this end, whereas women have sat and met over centuries to collectivize and bullet point their grievances and attributing it to the conscious volition of men rather than perhaps indirect behavioral expressions on the journey to mastery and self-expression.
Sure. So there's this notion that women have been in a subordinate position throughout all or most of history, and maybe in some ways that they were, and is that orchestrated, or was that a consequence of biology, in the sense that in a situation of scarcity, men have a bigger stature and are going to have to go out and kill some deer and bring some food and fight with neighboring tribes to protect women who might otherwise be raped, and therefore by virtue of their stature they may find themselves in the more, what's the opposite of subordinate? Superior position. Before, I really want to, you've got a completely different perspective on this that I haven't really heard elsewhere. I'm not super well versed in your views, which is why it's going to be really exciting to open you up. But before we do that, I wanted to try, we're going to put you in a subordinate position if you don't perform well in this interview or something. So what I wanted to do before that is assert my dominance, my patriarchal dominance over the conversation by doing a little bit of an experiment about a conversation we can have before we tap your gold mine of knowledge, which is to talk about what it would look like if we did live in a patriarchal society compared to what we live in now. And these are some points that I've thought of or collected. First of all, I think that women would be trained and conditioned to desire promiscuous sex constantly and hand it out to men left, right, and center instead of being looked down upon and slut shamed. They'd be like, the more you handed it out, the more virtuous and
more desirable
you'd be. And in some societies, we've had different views to sex. So we see in our society, say, someone who's virginal, male or female, is innocent, right? If you lived in ancient Greece and you were a dude that wasn't interested in sex, you wouldn't be seen as innocent. You would be seen as weird, because your city-state has enemies and you're meant to have kids to join the army to protect your city-state. So different cultures have different views towards sex.
Yeah, can I just cut in quickly there? Yeah, okay. What was it you said about virgins in our society being sort of innocent? Okay, but female virgins are looked upon as something desirable. Male virgins are something to be derided, usually by both males and females. Oh, you're a virgin, you never had sex before, blah, blah, blah. That's something that a man gets picked on for, both by men and women, whereas for a woman it's something desirable, especially when it came to marriage in the past. But
personally, I'd rather someone who knew what she was doing, but I can see why people have that appeal. First of all, I think that women would pay for dinner dates, and only women would be drafted into the military instead of 97% of combat deaths being male. Yep. In the States, there's 7 offices of women's health, and there are no offices of men's health. So when we look across the world, governments have been trying to create balance by creating departments specifically for women. But I don't think there's many departments being created for men, even when there are legitimate men's issues, which I'm sure we'll get into. And it's seen as subversive to create a men's department because, oh no, men are already dominant. But then when you look at things like the vast majority of hazardous jobs are done by men, and 94% of workplace deaths are male, or the fact that almost all of the most unpleasant jobs like refuse collector are done by men, sewage workers and things like that are done by men. So if this was reversed and women were doing all the most unpleasant and dangerous jobs and dying at the workplace, there would definitely be government departments created to try and deal with this. College admissions are now majority women. men would be assumed to have the right to decide what happened to their children, as opposed to 94% of the time custody being handed to women. This is what a patriarchal society that was created by men for the benefit of men would do. I'm not saying that men don't have certain privileges. They do. Women have certain privileges as well. But we cannot look at this society and conclude that it's been created to benefit males. It's not created to benefit whales either. When you look at the fact that 76% of homicides are men being killed, 80% of suicides are male suicides, and this has started to come into the media, and people are starting to deal with that, but it took a long time. There's 300,000 rapes of males in American prisons and a year, I believe, and we're meant to see, you know, no one's talking about that rape culture, but that's more than the number of rapes of females outside of prisons by a factor of many, and that's something under the government's watch that the government could do something about, but it's not seen as a problem. 93% of the prison population in America, don't have figures for here in the UK, are male. Men get convicted more often for the same crimes as women and get far harsher sentences than women for the same crime. Average sentence in the US by crime: female 18.51 months, male 51.52 months. Corporal punishment: boys are spanked 3 times as often as women. Capital punishment: it's all mostly men. Now, if this was all mostly blacks, people would say, oh my God, there's a grievous injustice. I'm sorry for going on so long, but people need to know these facts. Just one more, right? We hear that men earn more money than women, but we have, to a degree, a market economy. So maybe the tune of at least 50% of the economy is a market economy. Women account for 88% of purchases, and the power is not with who earns the money. The power is who spends it. So not everyone's idea of power is working longer hours at more dangerous and unpleasant jobs to earn more money that someone else gets to spend.
Or you die 3 to 4 years earlier.
6 years earlier.
6 years, okay.
Men pay 75 billion more in taxes in the UK than women, whereas far more welfare is paid to women than to men. So
yeah, it doesn't really, on that evidence, it doesn't really look like a patriarchal society.
Right, it doesn't look like the society's been set up to benefit men. And what's more, a lot of men are certainly in power, and this is a valid point that women can say, you know.
But many of them voted in by women.
Many of them voted in by women. And what's more, just because most people in power are men doesn't mean most men feel empowered, right? Or feel like they're powerful in their life. I'm not saying that there aren't issues facing women. Like, I've got a friend that's a jazz singer and says, you know, whenever she wants to get taken seriously and, you know, get together with musicians and guys and put bands together and stuff like that, people, you know, want to meet up with her and then they just hit on her and don't take her seriously as a musician and things like that. That's kind of annoying.
Has she ever appeared in any jazz magazine?
Well, I mean, that kind of things happens. I'm sure that sometimes women enter a boardroom and things like that and are spoken and are not taken seriously. Okay, so, you know, women need to. But
you're not taken seriously in the boardroom if you're a young guy. You know, if the guys in there are senior to you, or, you know, or you're maybe from a background that doesn't fit in with that particular culture or that particular business culture. So anyway, can we get our guest to give us?
So that was just our introduction, and I hope that you'll take the floor.
Well, to be honest, I'm enjoying your take. You know, I've been, you know, I have been working on this subject, on the subject of gender for over 20 years, and on this speaking out on relationships with patriarchy for 10 years. And I always enjoy hearing people's personal perspective and experiences, because it's only by multiple voices on the floor that we can find out that I'm not just some ranting, misogynistic lunatic that is, you know, just trying to stem the tide of common sense imbued within feminism or something like that. So hearing your voices, hearing your positions, hearing your perspective and the facts that you've dug up, not from my mouth, helps balance the argument, the debate out. I also really enjoy hearing your perspective because it brings up extra links in my mind and triggers me in particular directions. I liked what you were saying there, Antony, about how it shows that, or the points that you're making show that while certain men may be enjoying certain aspects of privilege, that and again putting that on a par with women enjoying other aspects of privilege, you know, those facts that you're stating do point out that it doesn't look like the whole culture was set up intentionally to benefit men, and I think that's a great way to start the whole thing out. I think there's another factor that comes in here, because obviously the gender pay gap comes up a lot, and the, you know, other various things. And I think one of the issues I've encountered when dealing with the feminist movement is the issue with chronology and the timeline, and also geography, and the boundaries over the times that we're talking about, and the geographical boundaries that we're talking about become very, very blurry in favor of the current argument, you know. And I've seen that evidenced as, you know, so for example, gender pay gap's an interesting one, because I think what has to be taken into account is when women started to enter the workplace and how many well-established, old, wealthy organizations with well-established boards of men were at the top. And if we look at the pace of change, then I think if we, you know, okay, maybe if you looked at all the boardrooms across the board, there might not be a 50-50 split. Should there be a 50-50 split? Probably not. It should be meritocratically determined anyway. But the point being that if we said that, you know, you've got some people that have been in their jobs for over 50 years, 40, 50 years, and you've got women entering those places for perhaps just as long, then we have to allow time for the filtering and the skills development to allow them to rise into those positions. And if we look at the pace of change, I just don't think it could have shifted any faster without, and the kind of demand that's coming from some of the younger feminists I've seen now, and I'm generalizing, is basically, look, it's still not even, just give us the keys and the salary on your way out, get out, you know, because they want in on the basis of gender, rather than, sorry, on the basis of sex, not gender, on the basis of sex, not on the basis of merit. And this is just a madness ensuing. But the thing we've got to go back to here is our definitions, really. I agree with you, we've got to define what we're talking about here. And you hit the nail on the head, Antony, right at the beginning when we were talking about biology. You know, and biology is the thing that has determined both the skill sets and the positions of men and women in preceding centuries and even millennia. This is the problem we've got dealing with this now, is the total disassociation from biology when people are discussing subjects like gender. There seems to be a total mental disembodiment that's taken place within academia that's now spilling out everywhere else, that has allowed people to completely disassociate from their bodies when they're discussing things. I'm kind of going to feed into that a little bit to help save men from these accusations that it's being laid at their feet as if it's some kind of intentional act. But we'll have to do that throughout the course of the chat. But as you were saying earlier, you know, this idea of a subordinate position, I think that goes hand in hand with another term that I don't like, which is the term opposite sex. Okay, opposite implies conflict. It implies kind of confrontation. It implies that, you know, quite a you know, not necessarily a friendly interaction or relationship. Whereas I prefer to use the term complementary sex.
Yes, I agree.
You know, it's complementary, and we're looking at complementary roles. And when we look at the power,
well, I'm all in favour of complementary sex, to be quite honest with you. Sorry, I couldn't resist that one.
You know what? I didn't even see the angle, Tam, so I really appreciate you for grabbing that one and waving it around a bit. So yeah, let's all favour complementary sex. So
I think that's, you know, even the sex positive feminists can get behind us when it comes to...
I think they would. The sex positive ones would, for sure. That's for sure. So historically, I think as well, we have to look at what defines power and what defines privilege as well. I mean, I don't think we're even going to have time to define those things, but I think if we look at where men were enjoying their power in times gone by, and where women were enjoying power, but they're choosing to gloss over that now, is part of the issue here. Because what we're seeing is an encroachment of women onto traditional men's arenas, which is absolutely fine in my gender work. That's actually normal part of gender progression, which we'll get into in a moment. The issue here is to do with the way in which it's being done, you know, which is to abandon the position of traditional female and feminine power and kind of leave that all hanging loose, which is basically that the entire remit of the domestic zone. And when I say the domestic zone, I don't just mean the home, I mean the homestead, the steading, the community, whatever it would be. So if we go way, way back to sort of like hunter-gatherer tribes, this is where my gender work really has to start with people, so they get a sense of where the power lies. Because if you just were to say, well, stereotypically and traditionally, where would you find the men and where would you find the women? You would traditionally find the men for reasons that you stated, Antony, which is biologically stronger, faster, bursts of power, things like that, that would make them just biologically better built to go out. Yeah, aggression as well, absolutely. Aggression, detachment, you know, objectivity. These are all qualities that are hardwired biologically into men from the introduction of testosterone in the womb. So in the womb, men enjoy objectivity and detachment at a cost, because when testosterone is introduced to the fetus in the womb, it burns certain nerve endings between the left and right brain. And this cannot be undone. And it doesn't mean men don't feel in the same way as women do. They do feel, but it allows an objectivity that cannot be replaced. It's like at the minute, you know, there's certain biological things built into the pelvic structure of men that allows them to have the strength density they've now got, so that no matter what happens in so-called sex change operations, you cannot change some of these biologically built-in features, as we're seeing now with men winning all of the women's events. They're applying themselves to, you know, they're winning weightlifting, they're winning women's cycling, the women winning Women of the Year in America. It's just I
mean, even something just basic like grip.
Yeah,
you know, the strength of a man's grip. You know, even like when MMA, you know, when you've got a man who's had a sex change is in there absolutely punching lumps out of women, you know, because he can, because he's that physicality is there.
Physical structure.
Yeah.
So
exactly. But the modern academia will completely gloss over all of that and make out that that's somehow socially engineered in some way, when they're just not looking at the biology at all. It's what we're dealing with here is a madness. We're dealing with an absolute madness.
And this comes. Sorry, Chris. Please go on.
No, you carry on. Go on. I want to keep it alive.
I'm just saying this really kind of comes out when you see some of the ways that we are told there's inequality between men and women, say in certain scientific subjects that women just aren't interested in, right? The science has opened up to women, and lots of women went, say, into biology.
Yeah.
They went into psychotherapy. Wonderful. Right? But they're just not really that interested in mechanical engineering or chemical engineering. It just doesn't interest many women. Those who do take an interest in it get jobs no problem, because everyone wants to meet a gender quota. And then they're disadvantaged because no one knows if they're there because they're good or they just got the job because they're a woman. Then you look at something like when women tend to earn $500,000, they stop chasing promotions. They're not interested in it. They want more time with their friends and family. Whereas the guy will just keep on chasing a promotion and chasing a promotion. Because broadly speaking, men and women have different interests. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then people assume because women and men are equally represented in some field or another, it's because of discrimination rather than the choices that people make. And I very strongly believe that, you know, if you want to pursue being a chemist as a woman, wonderful, you should do that. If you want to pursue being a stay-at-home dad as a man, wonderful. You just need to find someone that's going to complement you. And I think as long as everyone's got the option of doing that, then that's great. But we should not expect women to become more and more like men and men to become more and more like women just because they give them the option to.
Well, it's social engineering, really, we're talking about.
It is, and it's already happened. It's happened. And what we've got feminized men that are ashamed of and terrified of their masculinity, with nowhere to practice it, nowhere to get good at it, nowhere to evolve it beyond being a Neanderthal. And, you know, and then you've got the women that have been masculinized to the point where, you know, their idea of women's power and the women's power movement is to become more masculine and to behave like men and take on men's roles. When it's like, well, that's not women's power. That's men's power. You know. And what's funny is that the men are taking on a lot of these traditional female strengths, empathy and emotional conversation and various other ways of connecting, which is fine because we do need a balance in it. But the fact that it's been done at the cost of their masculine means that we've got a whole bunch of lopsided men and lopsided women out there that are struggling to learn how to relate with each other anymore because they're both actually afraid of their birth gender, their born gender. Because men in their I'll get onto what I mean by masculinity and femininity in a minute, but men in their masculine feel vulnerable when they're practicing it. Women in their feminine feel vulnerable when they're practicing it, and so there is a thing where we all gender flip ourselves. This is so my gender work is based on the Toltec gender system. I don't know if many people are familiar with the Toltecs.
No, let's elucidate for us. Yeah, just elucidate.
Some people might have heard of the work of Don Miguel Ruiz or Carlos Castaneda. They're kind of well-known Toltecs. None of them were talking about gender, though. The main gender guy is an African seer called Hayun Maris. He's no longer with us. But his books are a bit dated now, but they're what got me started over 20 years ago. And the premise within that is one of complementarianess between men and women, where both have masculinity and femininity in them. Yeah. But when we are sexed, you know, in the womb and at birth, one of our tool sets is kind of externalized. You know, we have an externalized tool set for whatever it is we're going to do in life. It doesn't mean men don't have access to the feminine or women don't have access to the masculine. They do, but it's about you know, which one's going to be easier to use really in the long term, and which one is going to be able to be your better pathway to power in life. But in the Toltec system, what is quite clear is that because those doorways to power involve us being vulnerable, trying new things, and exhibiting the behaviours of the gender, like I said, I'll clarify that in a moment, most people flip it to the opposite because they feel stronger. So I better clarify what I mean, first of all, by gender, because most people out there are now talking about how gender is how you feel. And you know, to some extent, there's an element of rightness there, but it's not anchored to anything. So in my work on gender, it's gender in the human form is an expression of electromagnetism. Electromagnetism, and the masculine in all of us is the electrical. And this is why men have these charged bursts. And what you'll find is that there are times, so men have a charge cycle in the same way that women have a menstrual cycle. They just aren't as aware of it. So there are times when you feel like you can take charge of things. When you're with your woman or your partner, there are times when you feel like you're masculine, you're powerful, and you can feel like you can be the container for her massive femininity. Now, that's not to control it, it's about containment. We'll get to that in a bit. And I'm sure women out there will know what it feels like when their man can hold them in that space of sexual excitement and arousal. And then there's other times in a man's charge cycle when he feels like a little dinghy bobbing on the ocean of her vast femininity. And if you look for those ebbs and flows in your own cycle, you'll find out that also another way a man can note when he's at the peak of his charge cycle is when he wants to, you know, get it on, you know, multiple times a day. And you might find that periodically there's these times when you're just surging, desperate for some sex or some action, and you can let go a number of times a day, and that'll happen for a couple of days, and then it'll ebb off into slightly less importance for a while, and you won't have quite as much oomph. And this is literally the masculine equivalent of the female's menstrual cycle. But what's interesting is that a man's capacity in that area is deemed to be about weakness, whereas a woman's is deemed to be just about biology. And my quest in all of this is to say, well, look at what women have achieved by being mature and open about their menstrual cycle. They've managed to get permission and social tolerance for behaviours that might ordinarily be unacceptable, or ones that would actually upset their relationships. And yet when people hear it's their time of the month, everyone's all right with it. Yeah, exactly. Whereas there's no tolerance there for the man when he's at the peak of his charge cycle, and his woman's just annoyed at the fact that he keeps coming on to her. And it's like, and it's been put down to either being animalistic and weak. Sorry?
Not you, my women.
animalistic and weak on one front, or you know, or an active discipline. Whereas nobody makes the same demands upon women when they're in their charge cycle. Now, there's a whole host of associated behaviours that go with this to do with the mastery of the masculine. So, for example, but we'll get onto that in a moment. Let's just look at the feminine for a moment. So, the feminine is the magnetic. So, women out there, what they've got to deal with is that, and I'm sure the women will be aware of it, is they've got to deal with their inherent attraction. And what's happening is, and this is why what women have to deal with, like your musician friend, what she was talking about with people hitting on her and stuff like that, is, well, this is going to happen when you're an attractive female. When you're a woman in your power and the femininity is there as well, you have to cultivate the skills that go with that, which is about how do you maintain a healthy boundary when you are exerting, exhibiting, attractive potency. And it's magnetic, literally magnetic. Now, men and women alike have to handle the energies of charge and magnetism. And it's how we balance these is actually what gender is. And I think the confusion a lot of people are experiencing in the gender area is because they don't know how to know when they're in their masculine or when they're in their feminine, which is why we now have this language of, oh, gender is just what you feel, and you can be gender fluid, pansexual, non-binary, whatever. And really my passion in this work is to give these, what I consider to be confused individuals, an anchor point to rest upon, and more than that, to recognize that we already have perfect gender language built into our language that fits for everybody, regardless of physical sex, that acknowledges masculine expression and feminine expression. And we can look at a few examples of that if you want to. But I think for a minute here, I just want to look at the issue. There's a couple of nods, and we'll come back to that, because the key point here, obviously, and the subject, and I'm aware that we are on a timeline as well. Oh my goodness. Oh, we've got time. Okay, fair enough. So the issue we've got here is with this idea of patriarchy, and this is the symbol I keep coming back to, and it's the kind of the grounding point for this, this energy of the masculine charge that I want to get onto. Because my issue with most men is that they don't know how to take charge anymore. Okay. They know how to take charge of situations, take charge of themselves. And when I mean that, I don't mean that in terms of charge over others. I don't mean that in this idea of oppression of others. It's self-mastery, exactly. It's
which leads to mastery in situations.
Exactly. And it leads to your increased magnetism, your increased potency, your increased effectiveness, because your deeds carry weight, they carry charge, and people are aware of it, they feel it. Yes. And the problem we've got is our culture is set up for the spasmic discharge of masculine charge. So what you've got is, you've got this idea that men are in charge somehow. But if we look, I mean, I've said this, I mean, there may be listeners that have heard it before, but there will be some that haven't. We're meant to live in a patriarchy that, here we are, we're three men here chatting. There's places that you and I cannot go unless we wear certain clothes. We're actually not allowed in. There's other men on the door that will say you cannot get in unless you are wearing something. And what is it you've got to wear in some of these places? Anybody, can you guess?
Tie, shoes.
Tie. What else? Yeah, you need shoes. But the other thing is, you need a collar.
All right, okay.
You don't get in unless you're collared. So you need a shirt to be on. So you need to wear, so the men are the only ones that have to wear a collar and cuffs. So the end of the garment is called a cuff. This is called a collar. And it's only the men that have to wear them. Even Bush and Blair don't get out unless they have their collar on. You don't see them in public unless they're collared. Now, to me, just because they're fabric, it doesn't change what those words mean. And when I ask people, who wears a collar, cuffs, and is tied? Who? Is it the one that's in charge? Ever, ever, ever. It's never the one that is in charge that is collared and cuffed. Ever, ever. Now, we live in a graded collar system. Across the civilized world, you have blue collar and white collar workers. And it's the men that are in those classifications. You also have the dog. You have the dog collar, which is the church. And then all your police are known by their collar number. They don't even have their name. They are publicly collared, and they'll identify themselves by their collar number. Now, to me, and now of course we do get men and women police officers now. But the point being, how is that a patriarchy? And why, more importantly, why does nobody and no history book refer to the introduction of that graded collar system? Why do none of us know? We've got images from 200 years ago, people in ruffs and funny, fuzzy, felty clothes and all the rest of it. But there's nothing talking about when this graded delineation between blue and white collar working came in and when the men became collared like this. So this is the starting point of my conversation normally, because this is not a conspiracy. This is like a conversation. This is just like I've spoken to my mum about this. You can speak to your granny about this. You can speak to anybody about this because it's not new language. It isn't new language, you know, and everybody knows what a collar and cuffs is. So that's my kind of starting point. But what I want to get at with that is the fact that, you know, I accept that women have faced a challenge of their sex. But my point is that the collared men are facing a challenge too. And what is collared in them is their masculine charge. It's the masculinity itself that's collared. And that role has been taken by state. But
right. So I was just saying, what you're talking about is a giving up of autonomy when you enter a role, whether it's at the workplace with the collar, or you're subordinate to the state. You're giving up your autonomy in those capacities, and you might be being paid to do that. But I wanted to anchor some of what you were saying to to debunking some more feminist myths. Like you were talking about this. First of all, it's the idea that men basically have been taught, say since the 60s, that jumping through hoops to climb up a hierarchy is actually power. But that power that you gain, it might be financial power, it might be some power over other men, you might get ordered to order people about. It comes at an expense. You have to take on more responsibilities. You might have to take less leisure time. You might get paid more for doing a dangerous job. You might get paid for doing an unpleasant job. So the road to power is a toll road, so to speak. Something needs to be sacrificed in order to get that power. The other thing I wanted to say was about this. You're talking about mastery and men and it feels so good as a man when you're in your power and you're in your masculine, and you're like, I've got my shit together, I'm doing things well, I've got things together, and you're like, that's when you feel like it's really good to be alive. You're glad to be here. It's a wonderful state to be in. But we've been hearing recently about how it's unfair that the media doesn't cover women's sports as much as men's sports, or there's not as many women musicians that are famous, and in any field which involves mastery, we see less women or less interest in women's endeavors than men's endeavors. And again, we are told that this is some indication of structural inequality. But actually, when you understand one of the reasons why men develop mastery is because biologically, it helps them attract a mate. The top guy in a corporation never has a lack of women that want to sleep with him. Neither do top musicians, neither do top sports stars and things like that. Now, I'm not saying that women don't need to compete for a mate as well. They do, but not by displaying mastery. Usually, although, I think a female shredder on the guitar is really sexy, but you don't see it that often. Women, do face the disadvantage of having to go through a beauty contest every day for no other reason than they're women. There's no question about that. But men need to face an alpha male contest every day for no other reason than they're men. So there are corollaries to the disadvantages that we each face in our gender.
Yeah, I agree. But I think to go in tandem with that is that I think gender knowledge and insight is new. It's a new addition to the human framework of the rational, reflective, insightful, navigated terrain. And I think I think the challenge that we're facing here is, there's almost, what does female power really look like? What does it really look like? Does it look like copying men, or does it look like something else? And I think in there lies the answer to that point you're making. So in Toltec gender, the idea is that, so the smallest unit, because gender is everywhere, it's in every interaction all the time. So if you look at the cell as the smallest unit of gender, so you have this electrical semi-permeable membrane that forms the boundary, that is essentially the masculine component of the cell. It guards the boundary, it keeps what is inside safe, and it decides who and what gets through the gate. Now, the zone within, the magnetic zone within the nucleus is the feminine in this instance. Now, in totemic gender, what happens is the masculine's role, so what they say in totemic gender is that men have this power, this burst, this capacity that is short-lived to draw upon muscular, physical, and other resources of ingenuity that are short-lived but potent. Short-lived but potent. And they say that these are to withstand the forays into the unknown, into the great mysteries, to be able to return with new materials, insight, or resource to hand over to the feminine, to the female, who then finds somewhere for it in the arena of the domestic unit, whether it's a cell that's processing new food, whether it's a home that's going to decide where it's going to put the deer's carcass, or whether it's a village that's going to decide where it's going to put all the wheat that's been harvested or something like that. The principle remains the same. What we're dealing with here is the fact that the arena of exploration has changed. It's no longer the mapping of the physical world. It's no longer emotional forays into romantic mappings of the emotional nature of humanity. And it's no longer even delving into the ins and outs of the mind, because that's what we spent the last century doing. We're now at the tail end of that, which is, this gender thing, which is going to be, I feel, finishing off the map of the mind before we need to burst into other territories as yet unknown. And I think this is why we're seeing a lot of stagnation in traditional areas of cultural growth, like arts, music, and other endeavors, where we're seeing a lot of regurgitation. We're seeing a lot of regurgitation, very little new, genuine creativity, because there's an element of entropy that's kicked in because of the collared masculine, because the very charge energy that would give men and women using the masculine charge within them the power to access these new zones and these new insights is basically collared to maintain a state. So I need to clarify what you were saying earlier about the collaring, Antony, where you were talking about the handing over of autonomy. I think that's a really good take on it. I would say it goes further than that, because it's actually about a loss of authority and a handing over of authority. And really what ends up happening is it's a death of sovereignty in a way, because what you're saying is, when it's service-based and volitional, then what you're saying is, I am going to put aside my sense of humor, my personal desires, my personal interests, all the rest of it, to provide this contracted service. So most people think of contract like a bit of paper. Don't think of it like a bit of paper. Think of it like contract. What you do is you contract to say, I am not going to do all the things I normally enjoy doing, and for this period of time, I'm going to do this. And that's where I will get money in exchange for it. But, authority is bigger than that, because, if we look at it as a word, it's about the author. So if I say in our language, if I say reality, if we're talking about reality, then we're talking about things that are real. If we're talking about serenity, then we're talking about things that are serene. So the suffix ity, ity, on the end of something always means the state of the thing before. So serenity, serenity, reality. So on that basis, authority is about the author. And the author is the storyteller. It's the one that tells a story. So when we are talking about the authority of your life, or your family home, mum and dad are the authority. So they tell you how you live and what it looks like and all that sort of stuff. When you go for a job, the employer is the authority. They're the storyteller. So they tell you what you're going to do while you're collared, while you're there. But really, the issue of the collared masculine is bigger than that, because it's about the big story of humanity, i.e., what is a man and woman? And what should you be doing as a man or woman to feel like and to experience a worthwhile life? What should you be doing so that you feel like you're being a worthy contribution to the planet and existence, and that you're making use of your life? That's the big story, and that's the one that's being challenged at the minute with authority. Now, this is where we come into the role of the masculine. There's other details that really sum up the role of the masculine more succinctly than I'll be able to today, but because it requires a few tangents, I'm not going to bother. We'll just talk about the nub of it, which is
what are men for?
Yeah. Well, if we look at the biology, so in men, so women are born with all the follicles that will become their eggs. They cannot produce anything new in their biological life, in their body. Any egg they put out during their menstrual cycle was there as a follicle at birth. Nothing new there. If you look at a woman when she's aroused or interested in a man, unless she's wearing some kind of skimpy t-shirt, there's going to be no visible symbol that she is sexually interested. Nothing on show. But let's look at the men in comparison to that. Men are making new sperm all the time, every day. Every day there's something new going on there. Men have two distinct states to their sexuality. Two distinct states. One of them is when he's got a point, and the other one is when he's limp or flaccid, and he doesn't. One is when he's charged, and he has to discharge, and the other one is when he doesn't. So that's one of the ways into this conversation of seeing how women and the feminine and the female, so women as an expression of the galactic feminine or whatever, or the feminine in human form, are about form and state. So they're about forms and states, whereas the masculine is about formless and change. It's about formless and change. Now, there's other angles on that. It'd be nice to be able to go into them, but I don't think we've got the time that would really pack that out for you. I mean, if you want to do it, we can do it, but it's a big thread.
Don't worry, we can always have you back.
You can indeed. That's right. That's right. So interestingly, this is where what's actually collared is your change energy. It's about changing the state. And that spark, we even talk about the spark, the spark of an idea. That's the masculine, and men and women alike. Whenever we're talking electrical, it doesn't matter what biological sex you are. Whenever we're talking electrical, it's the masculine. Whenever we're talking the magnetic, the receptive, the receiving, we're talking the feminine. Whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. Even language and communication is a great example of this, because communication is a gender subject. But because we can't work it out at a biological level, we don't even understand what conception is. To conceive an idea is gender. Conception is gender. That's what thinking is. And because we haven't got a grip of it at the most basic biological level, we can't develop the mastery required at the communicative level and the levels beyond that, because gender exists in all of them. There's just no escaping it. There's no escaping this cascading change in charge energy in all of us. So in communication, again, as an example, we already said, so in all mammal fetuses are female first. So I know the XY chromosomes are there originally. Yeah. But the point being that at day 47 or 49, something happens that causes the ball's energy in men to be pointed out, and the ball's energy in women to be internalized. And one of them becomes a tube on the a tube pointing out for men and a tube pointing in for women. But it's essentially the same basic bits, basically. Now, this is that basic difference of pointing out is how you know in communication who's in the male role, because the one that's in the male role is the one that's making the point at any time in any conversation. And what we have in our culture is the problem where communication doesn't take place because everybody's waiting to make a point, and nobody's sitting in the feminine of receiving the point, being open to the point. And this is about gender misunderstanding. So when you've got a whole bunch of people sitting there just waiting to make a point, it's just a bunch of mental masturbation. It's a bunch of masculine sword crossing because the people don't know how to flip their genders to say, someone else is making a point, I can flip into receiving this. That's why I was quite happy to be interrupted by you, Antony, because I could see the spark of a point in you, and I'm adept at being quite comfortable flipping my gender to saying, I'm ready to receive. Come on, hit me with it, penetrate me with your idea so I can conceive. This is how it takes place.
That. Penetrate me with your ideas so that you can conceive. Now that is a point well made.
Yes, thank you. Well, that's what I mean. The language is already there and it's perfect and everybody gets it. Everybody already, when I do these, after this hour, or hour or two, people can go out and start looking at the charge moving in a room to see who's taking charge and who's making points. And everybody gets it effortlessly.
And if you're able to give and receive, then you feel in a state of flow where you're like socially lubricated and you're getting on with people. It's like, yeah, they're really listening to me, and oh yeah, that's a great point. And when you work with someone else on a project and everyone's contributing ideas, and it creates a synergy that, you know, that's larger than the sum of its parts. So this is for us to learn, not just in a conceptual way to go, oh, well, I mean, you know, Chris made some really interesting points in that podcast, but there's something actually here to be gained from learning to have this new conception of gender fluidity, and not in the social justice warrior sense, but in the social sense of like becoming receptive and having that spark of a point, that passion behind, because you don't want to, you know, no one wants to be made love to by a person who isn't passionate, you know, and it's the same way as a conversationalist. You want your point to penetrate, you want to bring that passion. So what's your conception of female power? Because we've heard you mention that, but we've not heard, like, what does a woman bring in her power?
Is it sex power, or is it
that would be patriarchal for me to jump into that one, wouldn't it?
Certainly.
Well, I would say Tam is getting close to it. It's really controversial, but there are two states that, now this is where you guys, I feel like, because I've been saying some of the stuff I've said here, I've been saying for 10 years. It's not news. I'm going to give you guys something new today that I've never ever said publicly in a group before.
You heard it here first.
That's right. And it is the doorway to women power. It is for the women, but they're not going to like it, you know. And it is so there are two states to the masculine, the feminine, two states in men, which is the feminine and the masculine. Now, in Toltec gender, these have archetypes, and they're very, very fixed archetypes, and it's worth elucidating them just to make this final point on women's power. So when men are, so all human children are female, regardless of their sex, because gender is relative. So in the conversation, gender is relative because whoever's making the point shifts, but gender is always relative. So for example, I may be masculine relative to my woman, and she may be masculine at other times, but even though I'm a man, I am totally always feminine relative to, say, spirit or soul, because I have to be open to its arousal efforts, for its desire to penetrate me, and I must be open to receiving that. Otherwise, its points won't be made in the world. You know, so I will always be feminine relative to that. So when we are boys and children, I have no points to make. I must be open to the penetrations of the world so that I can learn skills to survive. And I must receive those points from both my mother and my father. I cannot maintain the boundary. I can't protect the boundary. I can't take charge to have forays into the unknown. I'm wholly feminine when I'm a boy. So on that basis, the feminine archetype of men is the boy. And we will always have the boy in us to fall back on. The boy behaviors will be our anchor. That will be our default position. And that's why we have this lad culture. It's part of the keeping men in the boy so that they cannot take charge. This is all about stopping the men from taking charge within themselves. Because if we had men in charge of themselves, there would be no need for a state, because the community would be safe, it would be well bounded, there would be absolutely no need for a state whatsoever. So you've got by the
would you just cut in here just quickly? I mean, would you agree with me that lad culture, if not created by, was certainly abetted by feminism?
Oh, absolutely.
Can you explain that to me, because it's a perspective?
Okay, well, so my perspective is that lad culture was created because as Darren mentioned, while you're a boy, you're not becoming a man, and therefore you can be controlled. So when you're a lad culture, it's great. It lets the guys let off steam and do the laddish things, but they're not growing up properly. They're not growing up and becoming men, so they can be controlled.
So how did feminists create that?
I think they contributed to that by. Okay, I don't know. Maybe.
I've got the answer. No, this is you're going to love this, Tam, because it's exactly the answer you're looking for that clears that up for you, and it is to do with what the masculine in a woman is. So. Let's remember, the masculine is always the point maker. Okay, it's always the point maker. So this is why, it doesn't matter. We're going on a tangent there. So in that family unit again, because the mother is protecting the boundary for the children, she's handing the resources in when they're ready. She's making the points to the children and penetrating them with the new ideas and all the rest of it. Some of it's mind rape, some of it's not. You know, same as with men. The name of the masculine archetype in women is called the mother. And what happens in a relationship is that if the man is not in his man and he's in his boy by default, women cannot help but mother him. It's got nothing to do with behavior. It's not behavioral. It is pure gender energy, and it's to do with how men, the initiation of a man is different, because men and women both start off feminine. Women just have to strengthen their feminine, whereas men have to flip a gender. It's completely different. And this is why you get this earlier maturation in girls than you do in boys. It's because they're already anchored in the gender they're going to remain in, whereas men have to actually consciously and actively flip a gender, which is why there would be rites of passage for men having initiations, but not women, because the woman's rite of passage is marked by the production of another form, another state, which is a child. Childbirth is a fixed initiation for women. Men's is different because their energy is completely different. So what we're dealing with feminism is because you know, this gender rebalancing has been happening for over 100 years. So if we go back to the old Victorian model of sex and interaction, what we had was a very fixed behaviors of men and women. But then something happened. Feminism started first, which was the beginning of the strengthening of the masculine in women, because they were looking to take some charge. They were looking to make some points. So they got better at it. And they were supported by lots of men. They were also challenged by lots of men, but they used the transactionalization of sex to get their way. And so that was when, you know, the withdrawal of sex was used to get men to side with the cause of feminism, which was fine. So the masculinity in women got strengthened first. But then something happened to the men. And what happened in around 1907, 1911, but it was the World War I. And what happened to entire swathes of men was that they were literally wiped out. Now, for me, any women, because the bizarre thing we're dealing with now today as men is, women are being fed a story of oppression for women centuries long, as if it was all still happening today, and as if no man had paid the price for those deeds centuries old. And I say, those men in those trenches paid in full, because they died screaming, terrified, with the wails of their brothers beside them in the stench of feces, piss, guts and blood. They paid in full. No more balance from then. If you want to talk about stuff going on today, fair enough, but don't be dredging up stuff from then as if nobody had paid the price for that. But what happened? So that was the loss, that was the decimation of that old gender model, that old way of thinking. Where were the boys when the men were off at war? Where were they? Where were the boys?
Home with their mothers.
Home with mum. And that the removal of the masculine influence and the extra feminine influence was the beginning of the feminization of the men. Yeah, now, what's happened over successive wars is, and the world wars of the 20th century, is we've seen further decimation of the male model and an ever-increasing masculinization of women, feminization of men, to the state we're now at today, where because women went first, their masculine is super strong. We're dealing with a super strong mother archetype. And that's what the toxic feminism is. It's ungrounded maternalism, basically.
And nothing men do will ever be good enough. And women will be, a mother will be absolutely vicious in protecting her children. And that's what you get with the feminist movement as well. These people are victims. If you encroach upon a victim, we will eviscerate you. And they're brutal and heartless and critics. And so is a woman who's taking care of her child. Now we have a situation where for a long time, most of the teachers in school are women. Now, not only that, but the way that they teach in schools is more in line with the way that women best learn, rather than the way that boys best learn. So what we have is boys learning to suck up to women, rather in order not to avoid trouble. And anyone, man listening to this and who's had a partner, and women listening to this who's got a male partner, will agree, you know, women hate it when their men treat them like they need their permission to do something. They hate when their man defers to them. Why do they want to be put in the position of, like, you know, should I do this or should I do that? And then if they say, well, do that, and it turns out to be the wrong decision, then you're going to say, well, babe, you told me to do that, and I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to do this other thing. You know, women really, women love when their men know what they're doing.
Take charge.
Exactly.
Take charge. And that allows, and that allows your woman to be a cheerleader for you and like be your biggest fan and biggest supporter. And women love being the biggest fan of their man, but they don't want to give him instructions.
Exactly.
Because then she's his mother, not his cheerleader.
Exactly. Now that some women want that at first because of the illusion of control it does, but what it gives, but what it does do is it actually, because, and this is the thing, because they feel, they temporarily feel stronger like that. And that's that gender flipping I was talking about.
Right, I hear
They've
you.
got their masculine on the outside. Yeah, so they've got the, and but this is what the men are doing, is they've got the boy on the outside because it feels safer. It feels safer, so we've all got a gender flip and hiding in amongst that safe zone. But what they'll find is over time is that they will not be satisfied. They will end up unhappy and resentful, and then we'll end up then what we end up with is the toxic feminism, which is the movement of the disappointed female, the let down female. It's like almost like the movement of the wounded vagina is what I call it, where these women have, but the thing is they've been let down. The men were meant to keep them safe, and you bloody didn't. You didn't. Where were you? You know. And the young men today, and I was one of them. I'm still fighting the feminization of me, which was I grew up in the 80s, and I bought the Cosmo myth, where women are telling us what they want. They must know. No. They must know. They must know. So if I do that, then hey, my chances I'm in. Rubbish. I've never met anybody who went down that femi-man route that is in a happy long-term relationship that they're still in. Yeah, many of them had long-term relationships, 10 plus 15 years. They're all finished now. None of them are still in their relationships because that and a lot of the women went off with traditional manly men. And it was because they enjoyed being able to fall into their feminine for a bit and to enjoy the feminine power for a bit, to enjoy feeling safe and trusting the man to do so and not having to do all those decisions. It's a total myth that men and women have been fed to turn them against each other. And the problem we've got here is that whole men and women should do the same, you know. Equality means the same. Rubbish. Rubbish. Equality is we complement each other beautifully because we do different things. We perform different roles in the unit of the human battery, the electromagnetic battery, where the charge rises in the man, the woman takes it from him. You can do stuff with that. And that's the funny thing is men have forgotten how to give it to women in terms of charge, and women have forgotten how to take it from men. You know, and I'll tell you what, that some of the most satisfied women I know, they love it and want their man to give it to them. And their men love it when the woman can take it. And it's charge we're talking about here. It's charge of power. Now what we've got with the men is we've got an entire culture set up for you to be the spasmic, flaccid boy. So that the second any charge stirs in you, you can go and spend it on some porn. You can go and suppress it with some drugs and alcohol freely any day of the week. Or if you need more than that, if you're a bit more charged than that, you can go to the football stadium at the weekend, which is all about the spasmic venting of masculinity, and just go, and you'll see that men wait for that moment, even if they're by themselves in the pub. You can see a man, if there's, you know, you could be sitting in a pub and all of a sudden you hear one man out of nowhere go, whoa! And you look over and be like, what? And you see he was watching the football and suddenly everybody's all right with it. A bit like a woman on a menstrual cycle, everyone's all right with it. But he's been like waiting for that minute all week because it's the only time that he's allowed to let that charge energy move through him. But it's spasmic. It's not dexterous. It's not skillful. And this is the problem we've got, is the world is calling for us to be as skillful with our masculinity as we are with our bodies. And we were spasmic with these bodies when we first picked them up. You know, you look at how you wear as a baby on the mat, your legs and arms, you couldn't use them at all. And now you can do all sorts of fancy stuff with them, but only by using them and getting it wrong. Using them, getting it wrong, using them, getting it wrong, using them, getting it wrong. We've got to do the same with our gender energy, and we don't get the space for it. It's like that, you know, there's no space for men to become skillful. And if you're anything like me, the very first times you started to show your gender energy, you were met with derision, judgment, scorn. You know, the whole shooting match. I'm not saying women are any different in that respect, but the point being, everyone's looking in the world for change. Where's the energy for change to come from? And at the minute, people are looking, saying, oh, and all the feminist men are saying, oh, let the women do it. Let's step aside. Step aside. They're like, what do you mean step aside? That's not how it works, step aside. What are you doing? You know, you just want to be sofa boy at home sort of thing. That's not it at all, you know. It's about the men rising to a new challenge. Yes, go.
Sorry, I was only going to say, there seems to me an incredible contradiction when I'm dealing with feminists, and they talk about, well, first of all, they many of them will deny they cannot allow a gender difference in the door, because as soon as you have gender differences, then men may in fact be better at some things than women, and that just cannot be allowed, right? So so they'll say, okay, it's all social construct, but then at the same time they will talk about toxic masculinity, and they'll talk about this masculinity is either to be feared or it's to be mocked. Yeah, you know, the idea of, you know, the kind of the macho kind of the guy with the big droopy moustache and the shirt open to the chest and the medallion, and you kind of like the crazy hair. You know, this is masculinity it's to be mocked. It's either to be feared or mocked. And you go, well, how does that work with gender being a social construct? If you actually, you know, it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, is it something that you've discovered yourself?
I agree with you. Part of this, the problem we've got with gender studies is that
well, it's in fact women's studies.
It is indeed, but the other thing we've got is so when a lot of Freud's findings, so Sigmund Freud, some of his findings were debunked by later psychologists because they were saying, well, he was only dealing with fringe cases of people that already had problems. And to try to extrapolate that across the general population who aren't unwell is not, you know, only partially applicable at best. And that's what's been discovered over the years, is that it's only partially applicable at best. And other psychologists have filled the gaps, and obviously there's still relevant stuff in what Freud had. The problem we've got with gender studies over the last 40 years is that it's been the same thing. What we've got is, you know, homosexual and gender confused individuals who are writing from the position of their gender exploration and informing this, and women who are also writing from the position of their gender exploration, and virtually no heterosexual men writing anything, or no hetero content coming out to just be on the bookshelf next to these other.
And what has been written is not included. They don't teach Warren Farrell the myth of male power or why men are the way they are. They don't look at and these are wonderful texts. They are very resourceful.
Yeah. And also more recent, though. They're more recent. All of those are more recent. Yeah. You know, they're late for getting in. So the gender studies door was already that wide before then. It had already created that disassociation, which was about justification and permission for people to make peace with themselves. That's where that gender disembodiment came from. You had people who were gender confused, who needed to make peace with themselves. People who had made decisions, people who discussed, like homosexuality, for example, when it was first becoming more widespread in the sort of 60s and 70s, was that we had people who were looking to be understood and looking to fit in and looking to you know, make sense of themselves in a culture that nobody could make sense of. So they were writing from that position, and this was informing the general population of the subject of gender. And what we're seeing now, when, like you're saying, Antony, some of these really good works on myth of male power, manipulated man, Tayun Marriage's work on gender, they do not even get in the door, because the feminists had already, Marxist feminists, I should add, had already taken charge. You know, they'd already taken charge. And what they were doing is they're using the masculine against the men, which is to say, well, we're going to use this charge, and then we're going to use the maternal scathing scorn to keep you in your boy and keep reiterating things like all men are boys and all the rest of it, which is just how the mother archetype works. The only way out of it is, then the only way to change this is not by dialogue. It's not by entering into the woman's miasma with them. It is about men learning to become dexterous with their charge, and through that, naturally causing women to flip their own genders, because all of a sudden they feel the potency of charge that allows them to say, oh, and this isn't happening on a conscious, rational, insightful level. It's happening on a gender level where women will naturally feel that it's all right for their gender to flip. And it happens. Right. You know, I don't know if you've come across the red pill movement at all.
Yeah, of course.
So red pill, So red pill is, I consider that to be almost like the male equivalent of feminism, where men have sat down and listed their issues that they have with women. But there's a lot of really good intellectual, rational insight that's come out of that. And one of the things I've noticed that they use in Red Pill is this, all women are like that thing. And whenever they're making statements from the all women are like that position, and obviously loads of women are riling up going, I'm not like that, I'm an individual or whatever, what they don't realize is that for every single one of those cases, the men are actually talking about the use of gender energy. And it's the use of it, because when you work at the gender level, you can almost ignore behavior. You can ignore behavior because when you're working with gender, it just works, you know. So for example, let's look at the communication, for example, because let's not talk about physical sex. It's not a great example for that, but in a communication sense, I've lost my point. I feel like I was going to digress there, so I don't actually want to digress. I feel like I'm going to digression there.
But I mean, when they say all women are like that, I mean, for me, it's just it's enough women are like that makes you sort of make those judgment calls on a daily basis. Say, okay, maybe she's not like that, but unfortunately, enough women are like that, so I have to proceed on the assumption that she is like that. Otherwise, I'm going to be the damaged one here. Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. But that's the interesting thing about it is it's about to me those actions are indirect actions that you take. Although they may manifest directly, you're acting indirectly to evoke a gender change, which is to get the woman out of her point maker into her receptive willingly, because she wants to. It's not control, it's not oppression, it's actually gender just working how it has always naturally worked. Yes, there will be people who will exploit that. Those are what we call pickup artists. They're exploiting it. But there are those that it's about becoming dexterous with that aspect of gender, and it's something that whether you want to face it or you don't want to face it, it's there. You know,
it's like gravity or any other universal law. You know, the thing is, that's the way the world works. Like, you know, certain things create attraction between men and women, and if you don't like, it's like, well, you know, if you don't like it, I'm sorry, you know, nature doesn't give a shit about what we want. Right? If nature gave a crap about what we want, we would all be attracted to the most virtuous, kind women in the world, not the beautiful, voluptuous young ones. And women would be attracted to the most loving, devoted men, not the ones that have high status and create chemistry and whatever other qualities. Nature is concerned with recreating itself and recreating the species. So what nature wants comes first. And then on top of that, you're allowed to have what you want. But that's always built on top of a biological basis.
I mean, just ironically, you've mentioned the pickup artist thing. And ironically, I feel that it's another thing that feminism inadvertently created. Because, because it teaches young men to validate themselves by female approval. The more women I sleep with, the more women have approved of me. Therefore, you know, I'm valid as a human being. I'm valid as a man.
Yeah, and also though, but more than that, in terms of the very fact that men have had to meet and decide how to get around the masculinity of women, which they call the bitch shield and pickup. You know, that's the masculine. And say, well, how do I get this woman out of her masculine? Because society has primed her to distrust me because I'm a man and put her into this gender flip. And actually, society has abused her to put her in that position. It's abuse. And that's why you usually find people doing that are drinking alcohol and taking drugs. It's because they're actually not happy. They're actually not happy. And what you were talking about earlier, Anthony, which is nature's prerogative, is that normally we would discover nature's prerogative by penetrating it. We would explore the world, we'd penetrate nature, we would find new ideas and have experiences that would tell us how nature works. But the modern children don't get a chance to grow up in nature. They are, for most of the daylight hours, taken into a boxed room to be fed abstractions. Right the way up until they're in their early 20s in some cases, if they go into higher education, where they've barely spent hardly any time in a field or woods or whatever, and that's allowed them to be literally programmed with unnatural ideas. And they then go acting upon these unnatural ideas that have no basis in nature, but in human community, they can maintain it for a while, and until they do accumulate actual experience in the world. But by then, they're in their 40s, they're lonely, they're unhappy, it's getting too late, all that sort of stuff. And we're just seeing this, you know, happening to so many people, where they've bought this myth of this myth of patriarchy, this myth of female victimhood, and it's influenced their behaviours, influenced their sensitivity, and they've then been unable to have satisfying relationships or interactions. Because, like you said, Antony, the evidence on the table, and this is what the red pill community say, is women can come onto red pill groups all the time, and men will be like, well, yeah, you can say that as much as you like, but the evidence of what these women out there are doing is in total contradiction to what you're saying. You know?
And when people say, oh, that's not real feminism if it shows a bad face of feminism, let us please judge by feminism by what they're doing in government, what policies are at. I saw someone saying on Facebook, well, you know, feminism is about men getting equal access to children as well. I'm like, wait a minute, name me one feminist advocacy group, because I know that National Organization for Women, the biggest feminist group in America, is against men having equal access to children. So it is a measure of how much men actually care for women's feelings that these myths have not been confronted to the degrry that they should have been.
I agree,
until recently.
That's such a beautiful point.
You know, so men are terrified of hurting women's feelings. They're very protective of
because they withdraw their love.
And you have like the gender pay gap. Some of the studies, they don't even take into account hours worked. You have people coming out with ridiculous statements like 1 in 5 women are raped. Jeez, when you look at the data, it's terrible. No one gets away with presenting such terrible data, apart from government. But
and feminists.
I do fear that we are going to have to wrap up quite soon. But before we do, you wanted to bring up a relevant news story, Tam.
Well, really, I was only going to talk about. You're aware of Sophie Walker. She's the leader of the Women's Equality Party.
That kind of fucks it right there.
Oh, so the Women's Equality Committee, you mean? The committee that they called a party by accident, is that what you mean? Or
I think it was basically Sandy Toksvig's Girls Club. And it's actually, and the Sophie Walker's the leader of this party. She's standing against a guy called Phil Davies. A conservative.
He's brilliant. Yeah,
I think he's brilliant.
Ever said, yeah, man.
I mean, he has some problems. You know, he's been a bad boy. He's been slapped in the wrist a couple of times for some things. But he got himself onto the Women's Equality, Parliamentary Women's Equality Committee, and the feminists were furious, and he refutes them time and time again with facts, and they dislike him for it. And now Sophie Walker has decided to stand against them in his own constituency of Shipley in West Yorkshire. On the grounds that he's a misogynist. And I mean, I've listened to a lot about this woman says, and I can only describe her as a misandrist for the things, you know, she has blatantly misinformed people. She says that women are treated more harshly in the courts than men. When anybody who's done any it's absolute nonsense, you know, and I can only describe some of the things that she comes out with as absolute falsehoods. But hey, it doesn't matter, you know. When some feminists have been confronted with this, they've actually thrown out, well, okay, it's not true, but it doesn't really matter as long as it gets as long as it furthers the cause, you know. Whether it's the domestic violence figures that they skew, whether it's the rape figures that they skew, whether it's the pay gap figures that skew, it all doesn't matter as long as it furthers the cause of feminism. And I think that's insidious, you know?
Yeah, it's toxic. It's toxic. It's basically, it is patriarchal because it's women using the masculine. But actually, this is why I say what we're living in. We are living in a matriarchy.
So does patriarchy then exist then, but not as feminists understand it?
Well, yeah, exactly. I don't actually think it does exist. I actually think what we're dealing with is because of the nature of the state, we're dealing with in a matriarchy. If you were speaking to say somebody in the Middle East, they may say you lot are patriarchal because what they're getting is they're getting if we said that the West was a cell, then the edge is where you will find the masculine. The edge is where you will find the charge, and that is what you'll find dropping bombs and decimating men, women, and children alike in the Middle East or whatever. They're facing patriarchy there, or rampant oppression of uncontrolled masculinity. That's what they're facing. What we're dealing with is the overprotective mother, What we've got is literally, that's why we call it a nanny state. We don't call it daddy state, do we? We call it a nanny state. It's a nanny, because it's actually, it's the maternal role it's taking on. It's feminine all the way, but it's the masculine of the feminine is what we're seeing in feminism.
But it's also driven by that demand, that feminine demand to be protected. So that you will bomb these people overseas because that will make us feel safe.
Exactly. This is the one thing that's been missing from all of the accusations about men, and it's like, who is it for? Yeah. Who is it for? Okay, the dexterity of the expression of masculinity might not be up to par. So, but I don't know anybody whose expectation and ideation is matched with their capacity. Everybody's ideation and fantasy is way ahead of their capacity, and this is where we're at. I think gender is no different. So, we need to build our capacity, and we need to tolerate. We need to build tolerance for the difference. What is required for us to go from where we are to that ideation, which is we're going to have to create spaces that allow and make it socially acceptable and normal for people to go through a period of I suppose supported spasmic behavior on their journey to mastery and dexterity, because this applies already physically and everybody does it. So nobody slags off a kid if they're running and they fall when they're running. Everybody's like, oh, and they help them up and they say, yeah, it was great, you did well. And so the kid doesn't mind so much and it'll keep running next time. But, it's a big ask to ask for it for gender, because we don't even give it to each other for emotions. So if you look at when people really start to experience their emotions at puberty, they spasm and lash in exactly the same way as the physical body did, with self-consciousness, arousal, curiosity, all these things. And they're met with the same judgment.
And then we smack them. Exactly. And then we smack those kids instead of teaching them how to channel their emotions.
Exactly, to recognize every emotional charge that moves through your body is an expression of the desire for the world to be different. Every single one, whether you're angry, sad, excited, aroused, whatever, it's about, I wish it was different. Maybe excitement is. This is great, it's going my way, but it's about the only one. All the other ones.
Usually when you're excited, you want to do something with the excitement. It's like,
I'm
excited and I want to do stuff.
Yeah.
Well,
that's when you're ready.
We could probably do another whole hour, and if we get popular demand from our audience, they never know.
Because I'm excited.
I'm excited.
Okay.
So
I want to finish.
But in the meantime,
I've got 1 point to finish on, but you go.
Please make your point and then go straight into telling people where they can find more of your work.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the bit, because I told you guys I was going to give you something new and fresh, and I've not given it yet. I've got to do it. It has to be done. So
you tease.
Well, no, I'm going to give it. This is it. So all gender can be summed up in the most basic shapes. This is about the geometry of the mind. I know it's taking us into a different avenue, but it's very relevant here. So the masculine states are to do with having a point and drawing a line. These are expressions of the masculine. Then having enough charge to be able to cross the line. Now, when we do that, so if we draw a line, which is a masculine energy, drawing the line, because it is discrimination, discernment, and division. That's what the masculine does. But we've been told discrimination is a bad thing, division is a bad thing. I'm referring to it in a positive sense, where our cells divide to give us the experience of unity that we experience now. This is what nature does, is it? It's through the division of my cells and the discrimination between them that I can enjoy the functionality of being a human. When I break down those lines between them, we get a blob. We call it cancer. And I think feminism's a cancer. I think collectivism's a cancer. I think globalism's a cancer. These are actual cancers. Now, if we take that line shape and we cross the line, what we have is this is an electrical symbol. So what do you call that symbol? If you can see it, if I do that, what is that electrical? Positive.
Yeah.
So when a man can take charge, that's what it is to be positive. Even a woman as well. So positivity has got nothing to do with a happy mood. It's to be anchored in your charge for change and to use that fuel to carry you forward when the world may not be going your way. That's what it is for me, to be both positive and taking charge. That's the two masculine shapes. So you have the vertical line, which is about drawing a line, and then you have the in charge. These are the two poles of the man, feminine, masculine. The woman has two poles as well. So her basic shape is the circle. And you'll see that everywhere in nature. It's the shape of forms and states. Okay, and states will use forms to reinforce themselves. They will use uniforms and paper forms to reinforce states, which are always about these contained units. But that's actually the closed feminine. That is the masculine of the feminine. That's what we see with state behavior is actually masculine, because it's making points, it's telling people what they should do, it's in control of the resources, it's control of the inflow and the outflow. It's all the masculine functions have been taken by state, only because the men are collared. But the feminine has a different state. So if we said that was the O, because the thing about the basic shapes is they can become anything. If I draw this, it could be a sun, a moon, the hat, an O, a zero, whatever. It's a great thing about basic shapes. So that's the O. When the female opens herself into her feminine state, we get the omega. Okay, the omega is the other pole of the feminine. And you mentioned earlier, Tam, whether it was a sexual energy. Well, the symbol of the omega is actually that symbol of the open feminine, the open female, and it almost looks like leg splayed character. Now, we use the omega in electricity to measure something. What do we use it to measure? What's the omega? Sorry?
Ohms.
Yeah, and what are ohms the measure of?
Charge. Power.
Resistance.
Okay.
Resistance. It's resistance. And
okay,
this is why, so the transition between the closed feminine and the omega energy, the omega, because the female power is mega when it's opened and activated, is resistance. That's the thing. So when pickup guys are trying to do whatever, they're trying to overcome the resistance. When women are trying to bed their women, when men are trying to bed their women, it's resistance that they're dealing with. And it's the difference between the O and the omega energy. Now, women, when they're looking to bring peace to the world and change the world, I agree, they can do that, but not by usurping the men, by activating the omega energy and taking the charge so that the men aren't going, they don't want to go and bomb shit and decimate and, you know, the only reason they're going and doing that is because there's no action at home anymore. Nothing's happening at home. They're being scorned at home. They're being scorned and blooming scathed at home. Who wants to be there? I'd rather go and stand on the front line than blooming go back to that being stared down the nose out there, you know. Give me an RPG to wield, you know. But the point being is, I genuinely believe the doorway for the women into their power is to understand the omega energy within them and to realize, so the male is the alpha because he's first. That's what that line is about. It's about being first. The male is the alpha, the female is the omega, but at the minute they're trying to be alpha. And as long as they're doing that, we are screwed, totally screwed. You know, it's about saying the men's power goes with taking charge and being positive, women's power through omega, but it doesn't mean both men and women have to cultivate dexterity with both taking charge and making points and being receptive, open, you know, accepting, tolerant. But I would say for most people that, you know, you've got all these people going on about, oh, the divine feminine and oh, we need to do more feminine. I would say we've got too much feminine because the feminine is acceptance. The masculine is non-acceptance. And at the minute, there's way too much acceptance energy, especially amongst the men. There's just way too much acceptance going on and not enough non-acceptance.
The world is.
Yeah, it's just the way it is. And oh, yeah, I don't want to speak out because the feminists will get me, which they will. But, but you know, your point is you've got to deal with, you know, this is the challenge we're up against, is that so men through taking charge will be able to shift that. But that was the thing I wanted to give you was the omega energy. Yes.
Super.
But it's definitely sexual.
And there's a couple of things there, like, I mean, resistance creates strength in the man. And you will find that when you get out of your masculine around your woman, she starts getting bitchy at you and she doesn't like your shitty masculine behavior. She creates a resistance. And that forces you to look at your insecurities and take charge of them and improve. I mean, I found that to be the case in relationships. And so that idea of the resistance as training for the strength of the masculine, and women definitely put up lots of that. But
we need that because you made your point beautifully there. I'm just going to jump in though, but the reason we need it is because to bring change to because this is the thing, when we talk about change and state as being opposites of each other, because change is always temporary. You know, you don't need change all the time. You just make changes periodically. The problem we've got is that state naturally resists change. It's not personal, it's natural.
Yeah, as you know, when you try and take exercise, the first day is always the hardest. Once you've been doing it for 3 or 4 days, it gets easier.
Exactly. It's pure gender. Pure gender. So when we're looking to bring change in the world, when we're on a Liberty broadcast here, when we're looking to change the state, as in the big state that's in charge of the nation, the level of resistance that we've got to have enough charge to deal with is massive. And I see what our women are doing just now is just, it's like practice at home. And I've said this to many people when I used to speak at sovereign events and whatnot. I'd be like, it's a good job you lot aren't on the front line, because you don't know how to take charge of your charge for change. At the minute, you'd lose it. You wouldn't give a good account of yourself.
And this has been annoying me about a lot of the left-wing activists and protests. You've got people who can't keep their own room tidy and can't make a living. People who cannot make a living protest to advocate how the government should run things. And it's like, look, take charge of your own life, make a decent living, then become responsible, become capable, and use that to go out and help. Sure, if you want to do that by becoming a politician, it's not what I would choose. But if you're a competent person and that's the way you believe that you can change the world, do it. But first take charge, first make your life good, and let's resonate out that way. And the other thing I just wanted to point about being on the front line, people who've got a wonderful relationship with their women are not going to be signing up so easily for going abroad to kill people when they can be at home making love. And secondly, so many people fall into that role because it's seen as a way of being a hero, which will help you to attract a mate. So there's so much depth in what you've said, and you've given us a huge matrix. Where can people find more about your stuff?
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I do have an existing website, but I want to direct, because you can search on YouTube under Darren Deojee and Chris Deojee, you'll find some old talks. But I'm about to be launching a new gender website. It's not out, it's not up yet. It's called, the website is nativereservation.one, so .one at the end, nativereservation.one. So if you go to nativereservation.one now and sign up there, I will, first of all, anybody who signs up from this podcast on that page will get a free copy of my gender book when it's published in a couple of months. I'm going to be launching it on Amazon Kindle, and for the first few days it will be free. Everybody who signs up will get a notification of that, so they can get a free copy of the book. And also, I will send out to people a talk on more detail on this conception idea to get better at gender of communication in your interactions. But otherwise, if you search online, you'll find other things about me. But really, for now, Native Reservation is where I'm going to be putting all the new stuff. So nativereservation.one. Yeah.
So please go to nativereservation.one and sign up to Chris/Darren's mailing list. And he will keep you informed, and you get a free ebook. And I'm sure we'll enjoy having you back on the show.
I look forward to it. Forward to it.
Has been released.
It's been great. Yeah. Thanks
You
very
people
much.
at
It has been a
home,
pleasure.
be libertarians. Make your points well if you want the world to receive them. Don't be a
take charge.
Take charge. And don't be a lefty
Charge,
or
be
a righty.
Nope. Go straight down the line, exactly. Straight down the line, make your points, draw your lines, take charge, be positive. All gender, amazing. Thank you.